Welcome to episode 56 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is the evening of Monday, September 12th. Duke recently lost a football game in crushing fashion to Wake Forest, but we are still here to talk to you. There's a lot going on today, so let's jump right in. I am your host this week, Sam Klein, coming to you from Denver, Colorado. I have my usual co-hosts with me in Atlanta, Georgia, Jason Evans.
Yes, and folks, this weekend, Sam Klein comes to Atlanta, Georgia.
To finally meet you, which I've never done.
I'm looking forward to it. The first beer's on me.
We're almost 2 years into this project, and we've never actually spoken in person. So that's impressive. And then also in Washington, D.C., Donald Wine.
I think I am the only member of the podcast that has met the other two. So, and Sam has done a couple of podcasts on my couch, as you guys know. I have not done one on Jason's couch. So I guess, Sam, that's your job this weekend.
All right, we'll see what we can do.
I know you're welcome. You're welcome to sit on my couch and do a podcast.
My relationship with the Evans family has been a bit up and down in spite of my never meeting them. But we'll tell all those stories at a future time because there's a lot to get to today. So we will start with, as I mentioned at the top, Duke's loss to Wake Forest in football this week, 24-14. It was kind of a dismal performance after a strong but obviously not extremely telling blowout against NC Central in the first week. So I'll start with Donald.
Wait, yeah. Sam, you know what it was? It was a vintage Duke performance, and I don't mean that in a good way. It was
sure. Yeah.
I mean, am I right? This felt like Duke before David Cutcliffe.
Absolutely.
Sort of the boneheaded mistakes, the kind of things you don't usually see from a Cutcliffe team.
Fine. Why don't you start us off, Jason, and tell us.
Donald, I didn't mean to usurp you that way, but
no, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I mean that to me that was one of the biggest takeaways from this game was that as I watched it, I increasingly felt like I was watching the Duke teams and look, I mean, Carl Franks and some of these other coaches from the past, good guys, but didn't really get it done on the field that well. And I felt like we were watching some of the mistakes that Duke used to make, really untimely penalties, poor tackling, somewhat questionable play calling. All preseason we heard about how Duke was going to be this big rushing team. And we have a redshirt freshman quarterback as our starting QB. And supposedly Duke was going to be a team that was going to rely on Jella Duncan and Sean Wilson, who are outstanding running backs. That didn't happen. Duke averaged 1.2 yards per carry. Let that sink in for a second. 1.2 yards per carry. We rushed the ball 30 times. A few of those, most of those being Daniel Jones attempting to sort of play the old Brandon Connett or Parker Boehm role of the QB who runs with the ball, and he was incredibly unsuccessful at that. Sean Wilson got 2 carries. Jella Duncan only got 9 carries. We were destroyed at the line of scrimmage. Wake ran all over us. We couldn't rush the ball at all. And like I said, it felt like, it was sort of frustrating in that it felt like one of those Duke losses from years past. We got beat badly on special teams. We got beat badly on the offensive line. There aren't too many phases of the game that I felt we won, other than I thought Daniel Jones did a really nice job at QB, especially in the second half. He missed a lot of passes I thought that he should have made in the first half, but in the second half, I thought he was pretty good.
The expectations.
It was very frustrating.
The expectations for the offense were kind of weird, right? Because coming into the season, you figured we're getting a new quarterback who's a redshirt freshman. We have experienced running backs. You would think that the team would be leaning, especially early in the season, more on those running backs. And like you said, it just didn't happen. And I don't know if that's more on the running backs or if that's more on Daniel Jones's progression. But it was certainly surprising. Donald, what did you want to add to that?
Other than the stats, which Jason broke down a little bit, I think the one thing that you take away from this that's disappointing is that this was an early season matchup in the ACC, and also within something that'll help us, was supposed to help us down the road when it came to seeding for matchups in bowl games, or even, at the end, if we were good enough to go to a championship game. But you want to start out on the right foot in the ACC, especially this year when so much turnover has happened and a lot of the teams in the Coastal have improved. immensely, especially at the coaching position. So it's disappointing because, it did remind you of some of those pre-2007 teams that just couldn't get it done no matter what. But I think the one thing that you want to take away as we move forward to next week, this is not a team that can rebound from big back-breaking plays. And I think the one play that really just broke the backs of the team was that 55-yard touchdown that Wake had. I think it was late in the third quarter, early in the fourth, on 3rd and 1 when they probably would have punted and we would have had great field position. This was that was a back-breaking play. And when you get that kind of play up and you can't respond, that is kind of what we have not been used to the last few years. And hopefully that's something that the guys will be just as angry about as kind of some of the fans are, and can rebound against a Northwestern team that really isn't that good and ripe for the taking.
You hit it on the head, man. You're absolutely right. The big plays were a problem. Wake had a 62-yard reception. They had a 37-yard reception. They had that 55-yard run. They had 2 other runs of nearly 30 yards. I mean, the explosive plays went Wake's way, even though Duke had a couple nice explosive plays. Chris Taylor had a 59-yard catch. Anthony Nash, who had a really nice game, by the way. I thought from a receiving standpoint, our 3 receivers, Anthony Nash, Jonathan Lloyd, and TJ Ramming, really did a very, very nice job. They were open a lot. They each had 8 or 9 receptions, which is really great to get those kind of numbers. But Wake had more explosive plays, and you're right. When Wake would have a explosive play, a decisive play, a turnover, or something like that, it felt like Wake capitalized on it better than Duke did. We would have a big play, and then we'd miss a field goal, or we'd back up with a couple penalties, and we suddenly wouldn't be in field goal range. Wake capitalized on their explosive plays.
There was some talk coming into this game, and I think that Vegas reflected that about how this was going to be a low-scoring affair. Both Duke and Wake Forest lean a little bit more heavily on their defense than they have in years past. And Duke isn't really, from in the Cutcliffe era, Duke isn't really used to leaning on the defense and having to wait for those big breaks to happen, which, as you say, Wake Forest had more of them. I would also point out that the linebacking core for Duke actually had a pretty nice day. Joe Giles-Harris seems like he's taking over Jeremy Cash's job as the guy who gets to the ball on every possession. It seemed like he was getting a tackle on almost every other Wake Forest offensive play. And finally, I just wanted to pour one out for Duke's run of having pretty awesome college-level place kickers. It seems like that streak might be over. And one of the things that you kind of see with higher-level college football is that there just isn't enough time for coaches to emphasize and recruit for a really good kicking game, and that might finally be catching up to Duke, because we missed 2 field goals this week. We also made 1 field goal that was maybe the ugliest kick I think I've ever seen.
I've never
through
seen
the uprights.
By the way, that wasn't the kicker's fault. That was not the kicker's fault.
No, it wasn't. But just
the holder dropped the ball.
Yeah, just in general, having a solid kicking game is not a thing that a lot of high major programs are able to rely on, and it's sort of a return to the norm maybe for higher level college football to have sort of a weak kicking game, because this is just what happens.
Let's be clear.
Maybe that's it.
Let's be clear. The worst kick of all time that went through the uprights is that kick that UNC made to beat us back in 2002. That thing still haunts me to this day. And it's the worst kick of all time.
Dying duck in the air. Yeah.
It went 10 feet, 1 inch in the air the entire time, and all I needed to do was 10 feet.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Frustrating. Really. Hey, I'm glad you brought up Giles-Harris, though. Man, that kid, he's just a freshman. I was like, you're right. He was all over the field. That's a nice thing to look forward to. And hopefully 4 more years of him.
I would say, looking back at our conversation with Bob Green a few weeks ago, he said, and he made a point of bringing up at the end of our conversation, that we're going to see a lot of improvement from the linebacking core. And so far, he's right about that. Anything else you guys wanted to talk on Wake Forest, or can we move to this week's game against Northwestern? No? Yes? All right.
Yeah, I have no desire to talk about that game anymore.
Let's move on.
It is in the past.
So last year, Duke lost a close game against Northwestern early in the season. It seemed like both teams were headed in a pretty good direction, and then Duke's fortunes kind of were up and down last season, but Northwestern had a really great year last year. They went 10-3, but a lot of the numbers said that was maybe a little bit of a fluke, and it seems like it's playing out here early in the season. They've lost their first 2 games, one to Directional Michigan. Shout out to Directional Michigan, because Western Michigan beat Northwestern and Central Michigan beat Oklahoma State this week.
Mustangs in the building. Let's go.
Yeah, Central Michigan is killing it this year. But then in week 2, Northwestern lost to Illinois State, which is an FCS team, what we used to call Division I AA. They lost 9-7 on a game-winning field goal at the end, and generally just looked pretty out of sorts the whole game. They've actually got a lot of the same problems that Duke has. Their offensive line isn't very strong. They're really not running the ball well. They're only averaging about 3.5 yards per rush. And they have a new quarterback that they're breaking in, Clayton Thorson, who was 17 for 41 against Illinois State.
That's really bad.
That's a bad number. I was reading I was reading up on Northwestern before we started here, and I came across a pretty angry rant on the SB Nation Big Ten blog from a Northwestern fan who is just not in the mood. And it sounds like it was well thought out and very well written. This wasn't, a random fan post. But general.
Was this the guy who had like half of his thing was in all caps?
Yes. So,
yeah, I love that. There's a lot of swearing in all caps.
There's a lot of swearing. Yes,
but it was very funny. It was very funny.
It's extremely well written. I think this might just be because I visit DBR so often that when I do Google searches for something like Northwestern football, the first few things that pop up are all SB Nation articles. So
yes, and that article, if anyone wants to read that article, it is pretty funny. It is titled, "Oh my God, Northwestern football is terrible," right? And the guy kind of calls for the coach to be fired or something like that. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. So I noted this in my research. Pat Fitzgerald is the longest tenured coach in the Big Ten.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
Really?
Because all the good coaches are new, right? Ohio State and Michigan both have recently hired very good coaches, and presumably they will both be there for over 10 years.
And isn't he still the youngest in the Big Ten?
He might be. I don't know if that's true anymore. There are a lot of new young coaches in the Big Ten, but yeah, he's pretty young and he's been there for a long time, and has easily had the worst showing of any of the Big Ten coaches so far this year. So yeah, Northwestern not having a strong season. Duke is in fact favored, at least last that I saw. Duke is favored going into Ryan Field, which I have been to before. It's not necessarily the most imposing place to play football, and like you guys, I've been to many games at Wallace Wade Stadium. It's a pretty similar level of interest from the local fan base, such as it is.
We should be clear about something. Losing to Western Michigan, obviously, if you're a BCS conference school, you don't want to lose to any non-BCS conference school. Losing to Western Michigan, though, is somewhat understandable. I mean, they're a MAC team. The MAC is pretty strong in football for the non-BCS conferences. Western Michigan routinely recruits against Big Ten quality schools, in an attempt to get recruits. So that's not, hugely embarrassing. But Illinois State, I mean, FCS, there's no, an FCS team should not be able to stay on the field against even a moderately decent BCS conference team. We saw that when Duke played NC Central. That's what you get when you play an FCS team.
And Illinois State is not even one of the good FCS teams. They are just an FCS team in the fact that they are in that subdivision. There's nothing great about them. Even it's not like the Appalachian States of the world when they were kicking ass around the FBS. This is a team that should not be beating anybody in any division. So that was a major loss for them.
So Duke's going to win this game easily, right, guys?
I sure hope so.
The
outlook for making a bowl game at this point is pretty grim. Just if you look at who's on the schedule and how those teams have performed so far this year. The Coastal Division actually, Pittsburgh looked really strong against Penn State this week. I don't know if you guys watched any of that. I thought that was one of the most fun games.
They looked really good. I saw something like Pitt looked really good. And James Conner is back.
James Conner is so back. Virginia Tech, not quite such a strong showing against Tennessee, but I'm willing to chalk that game up to just total big game weirdness because if you were at the Virginia Tech,
they played in a parking lot.
Right. Apparently, if you went to the Virginia Tech Tennessee game, you weren't actually going to see the Virginia Tech Tennessee game. And take it from me, I sat in like maybe the worst seats at the national championship game between Duke and Wisconsin a couple of years ago, where I could barely see. And looking at the views from the crowd on TV at that game, I mean that was a disaster from the paying attendance perspective. They obviously packed a lot of people into Bristol Motor Speedway, but the environment for the local fans not so hot. So rounding it back. Hopefully Duke is able to recover this week and play a little better against the Northwestern team that really shows a lot of the same flaws that Duke does. So we'll see who manages them better, I guess.
If you want to go to a bowl game, this is the game you got to win. Like you can't. Because after that, you're at Notre Dame next week, and you don't want to walk into that 1-2 because that game is going to be a very difficult game to walk into South Bend and beat the Irish. But you want to walk into there with a little bit of confidence that you're beating the teams that you're supposed to be beating. And Northwestern is one of those teams.
And Army, who's coming up in a few weeks, has looked pretty good so far this year. So you can't even necessarily check that one off as a definite win. It's a should win, but yeah, Duke's schedule gets a lot tougher if Duke can't beat Wake Forest at home.
Have you guys seen what Louisville's been doing? We played Louisville in like 4 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, my man has been.
Oh my God!
Fools.
Oh my God!
Yeah, they're very strong.
They beat Syracuse 62-28.
It was a clinic.
Wow!
And it wasn't even that close.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I was
Lamar Jackson. My son tells me has 13 touchdowns on the season in 2 games.
Yep.
That's kind of sick.
And is now leading the Heisman race because when you score 13 touchdowns in 2 weeks, you deserve to lead the Heisman race.
He's the first player in history to have 400 yards passing and 175 yards rushing in one game. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
So Cam Newton never did that, right?
Nope.
Robert Griffin never did that. All those guys with the arms and the legs. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd think someone at Baylor would have done that. Baylor routinely drops 80 points on teams. You'd think someone from Baylor would have done that.
Any of those
Or Oregon, right. Marcus Mariota never did that.
Wow. All right. Well, that's scary. Looking forward to the Louisville game. And that's on a Friday night, so it's going to be really weird because the schedule is going to be all wrong.
Yeah, on ESPN. The whole country gets to watch us try to stay within 20.
Oh, boy. All right. Well,
what's the line in that game going to be?
I had one more note on the positives for Northwestern football. Trevor Siemian and the Denver Broncos beat the Carolina Panthers.
Yes. Yes.
Which was impressive because it sounds like
yes. Trevor. For folks who don't know, Trevor Siemian was Northwestern's quarterback.
A lot of Northwestern fans apparently didn't know that until he showed up on the NFL sideline and they were talking about it. So that's great. As a Denver resident, although not a Broncos fan per se, it's at least nice when the local team does well because people are in a generally better mood. So I think we are all set with football. Are you guys all set with football?
Yeah. Time for some hoops, baby. Hoops.
Let's move on to a little Duke hoops. The most important piece of news this week from the basketball perspective is that the ACC basketball schedule was released this afternoon, and I wanted to throw it to Jason for initial thoughts on Duke's schedule now that we have both the non-conference schedule and the whole ACC schedule all together. Duke starts the season in December this year. The ACC schedule creep is such that. But Jason, what do you see from Duke's schedule? How do you think it works out for the Blue Devils?
So, Sam, can I get a ruling from the moderator? How long do I have to talk right now? Because I took so many notes on the ACC schedule today.
Why don't you go ahead and do it, and Donald and I will jump in when we hear you breathe.
You guys feel free to jump. So this Duke schedule is way better than last year. Remember, last year we had a somewhat brutal, like middle of the schedule where we were on the road at Louisville and we were on the road at Syracuse, and it was at Virginia. I think it was a really tough stretch. I look down at this schedule for Duke, and it's not that we don't play good teams. We play plenty of good teams. The ACC is very strong this year. But I really don't see a stretch that I go, oh, there's a 2 or 3 game stretch that is just, murderer's row for us. That stretch does not exist for Duke this season, and thank you. I'm glad. It feels like every time there's a tough, and we have some tough back-to-backs, but it feels like we kind of get a break. I'd say the toughest stretch is from February 9th to February 15th. It's 6 days. We have North Carolina at home, always an incredibly emotional, taxing game on a Thursday, not a Wednesday. Usually we play Carolina on a Wednesday. This year we play them on a Thursday. Then on Saturday we have Clemson. Clemson's pretty darn good this year. A lot of folks think they're a top 25 team. And then on Wednesday we go to Virginia. The game at Virginia, always really, really difficult. So that North Carolina, Clemson at home, and then at Virginia. To me, that's the toughest stretch of the schedule. But, that's not a killer. That's not, if maybe instead of Clemson you'd put Louisville in there, it would have been a real killer. But I think, I see the schedule for Duke, shaping up pretty nicely. We have 1 2-day turnaround where we play Saturday, Monday, and both those games are on the road. We're at Wake Forest and then we're at Notre Dame. But and that kind of a turnaround is always difficult. But the nice thing for Duke is that the Wake Forest game at Wake Forest, I mean, that's not that it's a home game in terms of the crowd, but it's just not that far. It's a bus trip, a couple hours, and then we're back on campus. You get to sleep in your own bed. It's not a true road trip. And then we go to Notre Dame. There's a kind of tough back-to-back in early January. We're at Florida State and then at Louisville. That's a pretty tough back-to-back, and those are teams that are further away, unlike the Virginias and the Wake Forest, the NC States, UNCs that are closer. So kind of tough. But I just looked at the schedule.
We have the 2-day turnaround between North Carolina and Clemson as well, but those are both at home.
Yes, you're right. Those are both correct. Those are both at home. Yeah, but Thursday, Saturday doesn't feel as weird as as playing on the Monday. Especially the road games. Look, we've also got a
Big East. We're not the Big East. We don't play on Mondays.
We've got a Saturday, Monday with Miami and NC State, but those are both home games. I was talking about the games. For it to be on the road, I think is a little bit of a different challenge. So I think the schedule shapes up pretty nicely for us. I like the fact that, to me, there are the tougher teams in the ACC. Are UNC, Virginia, Louisville, Florida State, Syracuse, and Clemson. UNC, Virginia, and Louisville are all three of those are like in the top 12, top 15 nationally. Florida State, Syracuse, and Clemson are top 25 teams, most people think. Well, Virginia, Louisville, Syracuse, Clemson, we only have them once each. The teams that we play twice are Florida State, UNC, Wake Forest, and Miami. Wake and Miami, should be middle, lower tier of the conference. And I mean, I like the way that it shapes up for Duke. I really do.
There's also an interesting.
By the way,
go ahead, finish.
Second season in a row, no ACC team plays on Sunday. I'm pretty sure. I tried to look and see. I'm so glad that we're now on ESPN instead of Fox, because remember, Fox had those Sunday night games that were just, it was craziness. But for the second season in a row, no Sunday games. Yay!
If you want to talk about the scheduling minutia like that, another interesting thing that apparently the people who have complained so bitterly the last few years to ESPN about the late game times, there's only one game that starts at 9:00 during ACC season. That's it's a February game against Virginia. Otherwise, all the games start at 8:00 or earlier, including the two UNC games start at 8 p.m. on ESPN this year. So
I know that's crazy.
I don't know how that works. I don't know how that works with like the overlap of other games, because are they going to start games at 6:00? I don't know if they're going to start games at 6:00 Eastern, but at least for Duke's purposes, 2 8:00 games, a bunch of 7:00 games, and then the weekend games are all over the place. But a relief, I'm sure, for a lot of Duke fans. I know that a lot of folks on the board who talk about going to going to all the games because they're season ticket holders, then have to, drive home long distances. And those 9 o'clock games or those 9:30 games can end after 11:30, and then you're not home until pretty late at night or early in the morning.
I mean, my bet for that first game, the one that's in Cameron on Thursday, February 9th, my bet is there is some smaller tier game that's going to lead into that. That's going to hopefully they'll put some team there that'll hopefully get a little pre-Duke UNC bump. But the game at Carolina on Saturday, March 4th, that's almost assuredly going to be a college game day situation. So there'll probably be an hour's worth of pregame coverage leading into that game and not an actual basketball game.
Yeah,
I agree. No question about it.
We'll see. Obviously, all these times are subject to change, right? So they may change their minds. But hey, maybe ESPN is just realizing that folks don't want to stay up that late, especially during the week, as it comes to watching games. Who knows? I'm not a. I'm not an. No, go ahead.
Can we talk about other ACC team schedules for a second?
Absolutely, Donald.
That's how crazy
anything?
I am.
I know that Jason had a lot to say. Donald, did you want to add anything about Duke's schedule?
Yeah, so the first couple of things I want to mention were you were mentioning the late starts in the ACC season, which the lack of them actually. We do actually have 3 games that start after 9 o'clock in the non-conference schedule. We have the Champions Classic against Kansas, which is the second of the two games in the Champions Classic, so that makes sense. You have the ACC Big Ten Challenge game against Sparty. That's a 9:30 start, and then you have the Jimmy V Classic, which appears to be the second of 2 games, and that is against Florida, and that would be on December 6th at 9 o'clock as well. So you have a few of those, but one thing that we talked about a little bit when the non-conference schedule came out is that there's the last week during New Year's Eve, there's usually a couple of non-conference games before we start with ACC season. That's not the case this year. Our last non-conference game is on December 21st. We break for Christmas, and then we come back on New Year's Eve at Blacksburg, and the ACC season is off and running. So that's a little bit of a slight change, and I think that might fare well for our team in the fact that we have 10 days to get our minds right for ACC season, and you can enjoy the Christmas holiday, and then they come back with their mind focused on the fact that every single team, every day out, is going to take their best shot at us and could actually beat us in any given moment. So I think I think the coaching staff is really looking forward to the fact that we have that nice little break between non-conference season and then the ACC season as well.
I was going to say, I'm terrified of that Virginia Tech game. Tech, I think, is better than they've been in past years. I think having that 10-day break, I'd rather have. Look, I don't love the cupcake games. I mean, I'd rather see Duke play tough teams, but I'd love to have sort of a cupcake. Maybe a day or two before, a couple days before that game, to get our juices flowing again. I think that 10-day break, especially over Christmas, it scares me.
The nice thing is that Virginia Tech is usually a tough place to play, but in this case, the game is at noon on New Year's Eve, so I'm not sure how many people are actually going to be in attendance, and there certainly won't be any students there.
Right. The one final
point.
thing I want to mention is looking at the schedule. Yeah, you're right, Jason. It seems that it's not as brutal. We don't have that murderer's row stretch that we did last year, but I think the ACC is a lot better than they were last year. And I think some of those mid-level teams that you're talking about, you mentioned Virginia Tech, the Miamis, the Florida States, those aren't going to be easy outs. Going to Miami, let me holler at my law school alma mater for a minute. We lost the last couple times we've been down there. So I think that's a tough place to play. That's always a team that's really going to be fired up to play us. The one game that really worries me just looking at the schedule is the fact that we go to Notre Dame 2 days after playing at Wake Forest. And the only reason I say that is because we've never beaten Notre Dame at South Bend, and that is always a tough place to play for us. That's a tough team for us to play every time out. And I wish we would have had a couple more days rest to prepare for them. But we got that quick turnaround. That's the one little area where I'm thinking that's a worrisome set of 2 games for me. But I think the last few games really kind of sets up, at Syracuse, I think that could be pretty decent. At Miami, I think that's a tough game. Florida State's a tough game, and then UNC. But those are spread out to the point where the coaching staff can get those guys focused on each individual game, and there's not a lot of distraction that will keep them. There's no trap games in that set, which actually works out well, because if there's a trap game, then you're focusing on the next opponent and not the opponent in front of you. They're not going to be doing that with this last set of the schedule. They're going to be focused on each individual team, and that makes for best basketball.
All right, so can I talk about the rest of the ACC now?
Yes, please do. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Donald, for your insights. Jason, go.
UNC's schedule. Have you guys seen the last 7 games on the Carolina ACC schedule?
No.
It is
Can you tell us so I can laugh?
It is a murderer's. I mean, you want to talk about murderer's row. You ready for this? Their last 7 games. They're at Duke. They're at NC State. Huge rivalry game. They play Virginia at home. They play Louisville at home. Then they're at Pitt, at Virginia again, and then they have Duke. Let's be clear. That is brutal.
I mean, you mentioned that
brutal.
You mentioned that stretch last year in February that Duke had to play, but that was only like 4 games that they had to slog through before getting another easy team. And that's 7 games.
And this is the final 7 games of the season. Like, we got to be pushing for the NCAA tournament and seeding. Carolina could play. I'm telling you, they could play really good basketball and go 2-5 in that stretch. And if they don't play really good basketball, they could go 0-7. Because
how did John Swofford let that through? I
do not know.
Somebody released the schedule without telling them, because
five of those 7 games. Five of those 7 games.
Swofford wasn't going to let that happen. Someone let that through without his permission.
5 of those 7 games are against teams ranked in the preseason top 10. 5 of those 7 games are against teams ranked in the preseason, and the other 2 are both on the road, including one against your most hated rival next to Duke, NC State. It is so like, the funny thing is going to be,
and that's going to be the point in the season where NC State is like really searching for a victory to get into the tournament, right? Because they're going to be talented this year, but that every year NC State loses a few games that don't make any sense. And so come mid-February, it's like, oh God, we need a signature win. We need to secure that tournament berth or that particular seed line. And they're going to be so excited for that game.
Oh, yeah. So the funny thing is going to be, we're going to be midway through the season. We're going to be played, like 9, 10, maybe even 11 ACC games. And Carolina, people are going to be like, oh, Carolina looks like they could win the conference. And suddenly they're going to lose like 5 of the last 7. And they're going to drop probably to the number 5 or 6 seed. Another thing worth noting, for years, it has felt like UVA has gotten the benefit of the easier schedule in the ACC in terms of who they have to play twice and who they only have to play once. This year, finally, it caught up to UVA. UVA has both UNC and Louisville twice. That's pretty tough. If you think that the top 4 teams in the ACC are Virginia, Duke, UNC, and Louisville, which everyone pretty much does. Those 4 teams everyone says are ranked in the top 10. UVA has 2 of them twice. Now, UVA gets a little bit of a break because we have to come to their house, but I think UVA has a tough ACC schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and say right now that the main contender, the team that will, I think, in the end be battling with Duke for the ACC title, I think will be Louisville. The teams that Louisville plays twice are Notre Dame, Pitt, Syracuse, and Virginia. And look, Virginia we know is going to be very good. I'm not saying that Notre Dame, Pitt, and Syracuse aren't quality teams. Most people think Syracuse is a top 25 team. But, that's not as tough as the teams that Duke has to play twice or the teams that UVA has to play twice. So I really think that Louisville is in fairly good shape and that, I think they're going to be the team that may challenge Duke for the top of the ACC, if anyone challenges Duke. I mean, most people are expecting the Blue Devils to have a really, really great season. But, Oh my God, that Carolina stretch.
Quick prediction. Will Boston College win an ACC game this year?
Yes.
Oh, man, I haven't really looked at their roster to see. Did they recruit anybody? I haven't started doing that stuff yet, man. Can't pop that stuff on me.
Come on, just blind speculation. Go.
Yes.
Will Boston College win a conference game this year?
It's so hard not to. It's so hard to.
I don't know, man.
In the conference.
You only asked if they would win 1. You didn't ask if they win 2. So I say yes.
Yeah. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no, and you know why? because the teams at the bottom of the conference, with the exception of Miami's worse than they were last year. I'm not sure. There are very few teams in the conference other than Miami that are worse than they were last year. I mean, I guess Carolina's worse than they were last year, but Carolina's still pretty good. But for the most part, I think the conference is up from last year. And I don't know that Boston College is much better. So, I mean, they're going to have to, maybe they could steal one against Georgia Tech. Maybe. They might not. They might not.
Right.
Wake's better than they were last year. So.
Are we good on the schedule? I think we're good on the schedule.
Yeah, I've talked my ass off.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Jason, shout out to Jason Evans, who looked at the ACC schedule more than John Swampert did. So that's really great work by our podcast team collectively, but specifically by one member.
Yeah, I do my best. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll move on to some final topics here. So one last note about ACC basketball before we get into parting shots, that this week the NCAA announced that they would no longer be allowing North Carolina to host any postseason tournaments. Specifically, they have 7 events planned for this current academic year that are not happening because of the House Bill 2, what a lot of folks are referring to as the bathroom bill. And I don't necessarily want to get into the politics of the whole thing. I really would rather focus on the effect that it has on Duke, specifically on the NCAA tournament, where most years, and this year was going to be the same way, Duke is expected to be a relatively top seed in the tournament, and the state of North Carolina was going to host a a sub-regional set of games that Duke was likely going to appear in. So I'll start with Donald, and like I said, let's try to avoid the politics here and just kind of talk about the basketball effect, because that's really what we do here. Donald, how do you think that this affects Duke this year and potentially going forward, not really being sure how long this little standoff will last?
Well, what it means is, since they're pulling the games, they haven't announced where they're going to move those games. One, I mean, I guess for people with tickets, that's a big blow. There's probably a lot of people who put in for tickets for this regional, not just at Duke, but also at UNC, thinking that their team would be there, and now they're not going to. So that's a big blow for the local fan base, for people who were planning on spending weekend in Raleigh in Greensboro for those games. And I think the one thing is that means we're going to have to travel out of state somewhere. I believe the nearest place is in Jacksonville. Someone will.
No, Orlando. The next closest one is Orlando, but I'd be willing to bet that they will settle on either Washington D.C. or Atlanta as an alternate site.
Does Richmond have a big enough arena to host an NCAA event?
I don't think they do. I think it might. I think it seats 14,000. I don't know what the minimum requirement is. If it's in DC, that's great for me. That means I'd be able to go. But
I'll see you there.
Yeah. So I think in that end, it's a blow because it's one of those things where, as a team you want to play at home or play home, and that was as close as you were going to get, and now they won't have that opportunity. So that changes things a little bit. I will make a small note outside of that. One of the other games that was taken away was the the Women's College Cup for soccer. Last year, it was in Cary, and this year was supposed to be in Cary again. Last year, if you guys recall, are lost in the final to Florida State, and they're expected to be just as good, if not better, this year than they were last year. So that is a big blow to that as well, and that fan base, because that is a sport in college that still relies a lot on the local turnout, and with a team and Duke that was probably favored to get back to at least the semifinal. I think that is a big blow for that College Cup as well. But I think those things, you want to rely on the local markets, and I think they will suffer the most. The fan bases will suffer the most because now they have to rearrange travel plans. But I think in the end, the team will say it's basketball. It doesn't matter where the basketball is being played. They're gonna have to play at a high level in the NCAA tournament. So I think it's just more in the fans' perspective of we will want them to stay closer to home, and now they don't have that opportunity.
I didn't even realize how busy Cary, North Carolina was with NCAA championship events. The Division II baseball championship was supposed to be in Cary. You already mentioned the women's, the College Cup, the Division I women's soccer championship was supposed to be in Cary. The Division III men's and women's tennis championships were supposed to be in Cary. The Division I women's lacrosse championship is supposed to be in Cary. I mean, Cary, North Carolina, was planning to be, championship central from the third week of May through early June. They were going to have 3 championships there: Division I, Division II, and Division III in tennis, lacrosse, and baseball. I mean, what a blow to that community! It's really kind of tragic that this happened. I feel for the people who really probably had nothing to do with this decision. And after the legislature passed HB2, there have been a lot of people in North Carolina who say they don't approve of it, but they're still affected by this decision by the NCAA. And I know we're not going to get into the politics of it, and I agree that we absolutely shouldn't. There's, this isn't a partisan podcast. This isn't Daily Kos or Breitbart or Red State or whatever. But I mean, I'll say it's a pity that these communities, Greensboro and Cary, are the two that are affected. Greensboro was going to have 3 events. Cary was going to have 4 events. It's a pity for those communities that this happened. I'm sure they put a tremendous amount of effort into bidding on those championships and being prepared to host them.
And they got them for good reason. I mean, it's not that they were,
they know what they're doing.
Cary.
They know what they're doing.
I mean, Cary's soccerplex is a tremendous field. It's one that the U.S. women's national team has played on for several occasions. So it's not a sludge field that they were just giving, a pity bid to. This is a field that the NCAA relies on for a lot of their programs, not just this year but over the years. So it is a really huge blow and a really big statement for the NCAA to take that. Now, I think the next question is a little bit further off, but there's going to be a lot more pressure now on the individual conferences, namely the ACC, to do the same thing. We don't have basketball, at least on the men's side, back in North Carolina until 2019, so there's room there. But they obviously hold a lot of events in North Carolina, and I think with the NCAA making this move today, the pressure is now on the conferences. Well, shifts to the conferences to do the same thing that the NCAA has done. So it'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds over the course of the coming months.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if the communities of Cary, North Carolina, and Greensboro, North Carolina, really, show up at the polls to voice their displeasure if they are displeased to lose these events. We've got an election coming up in November, and there is a specific political party that in North Carolina that worked really hard to make HB2 pass. And it'll be interesting to see if there is backlash either against the NCAA with people saying, hey, I don't like that you meddled in our politics, and so people support the North Carolina GOP, or if there's backlash against the North Carolina GOP by people who say, you cost my community these important events, and you've embarrassed us. I hope you guys don't think I'm political for saying that. I just sort of think it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, because we could see some kind of impact at the ballot box in North Carolina.
I don't think that's overly political. I think personally, it's more of the conferences making similar moves that would prompt such a response. It's not just the ACC. There's a lot of smaller conferences like the CIAA, which hold many events in North Carolina every single year, and they hold almost every single one of their conference championships, conference tournaments, and those sort of events in the state. If they start making these similar moves, that will be, I would say, more of an impact, because that is something that people travel around, plan around every single year, it being in that state. And if it's not going to be there, then where is it going to be? You're talking about some conferences where teams are wholly situated within the state of North Carolina. So what happens if they start making these similar moves? Or do they make these similar moves? I think that is what we're going to see over the next couple of months. Now that the NCAA has made this decision, I think now the people will start focusing on what's the next move. The next move is clearly the ACC. The ball's in their court. They're the biggest conference. that has that effect. But these smaller conferences are going to be just as important, and those talks are already happening in a lot of these back rooms about what they're going to do and what their response is going to be now that the NCAA has made this move.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there's a precedent as far as an organization like the NCAA taking such a strong political stand on something like this before. And like you said, Jason, it's going to be interesting to see how the public reacts to it, because North Carolina can kind of go in either direction.
Well, the NBA pulled the All-Star game,
right,
from Charlotte, and
that already happened.
So that was the first one.
That's hundreds of millions of dollars of economic impact.
Yeah.
I mean,
they estimate that All-Star weekend is $120 million.
That's one weekend. This is spread out over a lot of different events in a lot of different cities. Like I said, I'm not, and as you guys pointed out, not exactly clear what'll happen from here, but it's certainly an interesting thing to follow, and it puts college basketball and the ACC and Duke, because of it, right in the middle of this whole political argument. And so yeah, we'll see what happens. So we'll finish off with parting shots for this week. I'll start with Jason. Jason, did you have a parting shot for us?
No. I spent all my time looking at the ACC schedule. I do not have a parting shot.
And we applaud you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I do want to say that I am incredibly impressed that that Donald pulled out the CIAA conference, the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which I had not heard of, but my trusty Google helped me out with. Donald, props for pulling that one out.
I was right. Talking about that with my friend who went to NCAA. So CIA is a big deal. It's a huge deal.
There you go.
So
it's based out of Charlotte. I mean, and has several North Carolina schools in it. So wait, actually, I do have a parting shot. Sam, I thought you were going to mention what I said to you.
This is so vague.
Via text message. You wanted to talk about this.
Oh, that's my parting shot.
Okay.
That's my parting shot.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, you might as well give your parting shot now. You've already.
All right, it's my turn. I will. I need to pull it back up here.
By the way, while you're pulling it back up,
I'm
lodging a formal protest over this parting shot. We should not be allowed to take text messages out of context and use them to embarrass other members of the podcast team. That is my formal protest. I'm just going to mention it right now.
What are text messages for then, if we're not to be taken out of context?
The following is presented without context and without explanation, and I will leave all of our listeners to decide for themselves what it means.
This is about to happen, isn't it? This is about to happen.
This is part of a text message that Jason Evans sent me earlier today. It says, and I quote, "I like some of the more elaborate sausages." End quote.
Am I allowed to explain?
No, you know what?
No.
Let's let people think about it for maybe a few days.
Let it marinate for a little bit.
Yeah, let it marinate.
Caption this, world. What
you gotta slow cook that bad boy. Donald, do you have a parting shot?
Yeah. So my parting shot is we've had a nice little summer off. I've done quite a bit of traveling that's taken me to some wonderful places, but I'm very excited about one trip that I will be taking at the 1st of October. I actually think I'm missing just one game while I'm gone. Actually, no, I'm not missing a game. I will be missing. I'll miss the Army game, but I will be for the first time traveling to the island nation of Cuba, and I will be doing a U.S. soccer game that will be down there. So I'm quite excited about this kind of once in a lifetime opportunity to be in an island that's very we're still trying to normalize relations. So it's kind of an ambassador trip, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this island nation for the very first time.
Dude, that's really cool. That's really cool.
It's going to be awesome. Yeah, so I will give a full thing when I get back from that trip, of course.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I also wanted to note, I guess I sort of had a parting shot and a half, which is that a forewarning that in the next few weeks I will be debuting a new college basketball related song on the mandolin for you guys and for our audience. So stay tuned for that. We only just agreed upon it on its identity today, so I'm not ready to play it yet, but you'll hear it eventually. So if that's it, then we will sign off for this week. For Jason Evans, for Donald Wine, I am Sam Klein. This has been the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Duke Band, take us home.
I liked some of the more elaborate sausages.
Let me give you a big Labor Day surprise. Most people think if we all exercise the same and eat the same, we'd all look the same. And let me tell you why that's wrong. Your body is unique and your metabolism is unique. I'm Lacey Green and I'm a super trainer at Body. That's BODI.com. And you can't see me, but I don't look like your average personal trainer. I'm curvy and I'm proud of it. So I created a program for beginners only on the Body app to show people like us how to get incredible results and be our version of happy and healthy. This isn't just workout videos. It's people like you and me. It's community. It's incredible trainers. It's easy to follow nutrition and mindset experts to help you reduce stress and just feel better. And you can get started with my new program called For Beginners Only. Now, here's the big surprise. If you go to body.com right now, that's BODI.com, not only can you get everything Body has to offer at 50% off with an annual membership, you'll also get an additional 20% off, but only during Labor Day weekend. Let's do this together. Go to body.com. That's body with an I.com.